And now, a session brought to you by our underwriter Facebook, The Journey to the Metaverse. Please welcome Andrew BOSWORTH, Vice President of Facebook Reality Labs.
Hi, everyone. I'm Peter Rubin, a contributing editor at Wired and the author of Future Presence, a book about virtual reality and human connection. I'm pleased to be with you today to talk all things Metaverse with our guest, Andrew BOSWORTH, the VP of Facebook Reality Labs. BOSWORTH, or Boz, as most people know him, graduated from Harvard in 2004, and after a stint as a developer at Microsoft, he joined Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook in January 2006, where he created Newsfeed and many early anti-abuse systems, some of which are still in production. After working briefly on optimizing site speed and reliability, Boz established and ran Facebook Bootcamp, a 6-week program designed to help grow the engineering team and maintain its culture. He then led the integration of the Messenger and chat products while improving stability, followed by 10 years as the direct lead of Groups, Messenger, and video calling teams. He's also been the engineering director overseeing events, places, photos, videos, timeline, privacy, mobile monetization, and feed ads. So just about everything you can imagine within Facebook. Most recently, he served as a VP of Ads and Business Platform, where he led engineering, product, research, analytics, and design. And in 2017, he created Facebook's umbrella AR/VR organization, which was in 2020 renamed Facebook Reality Labs. And that's where he drives all of Facebook's efforts in augmented reality, virtual reality, the metaverse, and consumer hardware across Oculus, Portal, and research. Andrew, thanks so much for being here today.
That's a mouthful. Thanks for getting through it.
It really was. It's just about everything, like I said, you can imagine. But we're obviously here to concentrate on this sort of last part, not final part, most recent part. So to unpack a little bit, what exactly is Facebook Reality Labs for people who are unfamiliar with it, and what's your vision for it?
Yeah, Facebook Reality Labs is to some degree, I think, Facebook's response to what has been a real plateauing of progress on mobile development platforms. You know, we came up in the web, which was this tremendous period of growth, and then we got to harness the power of mobile phones, which has been just a tremendous period of advancement for technology. But the phones that we have in our pockets now are pretty similar to the ones that we had 3 years ago, and they probably will be pretty similar 3 years from now. And as wonderful as they are, and they are marvels, there are many things that they do not do perfectly. They don't do as well as we would like. And Facebook has a long track record of investing well ahead of a technology being able to exist when we have the idea that it could exist, and in particular with a focus on how we can connect people better. You know, one of the critiques that I think is often levied around the phone, and I agree with it, is that we have to choose between the people we're physically with and the phone in our pocket. We can do, they're both great, but we have to kind of do one or the other. We see a future where these things are less mutually exclusive and people are more empowered to work or socialize wherever they are on the world, without the kind of limitations that come with not being able to be physically present with the people you're with, but also not having to choose between those connections and the connections with the people that you're physically with.
So what does that mean concretely from sort of a product perspective? What has FRL rolled out? What are they looking to roll out? What have they announced to support that idea?
Yeah, it's a broad range. So things like Portal, which is kind of a best case scenario for this kind of interaction, where, hey, we've got a high-res camera on both sides. We have full richness of facial expressions. It's not as good as being there, but it might be the next best thing. But then as you add people, video calling starts to break down. I think most of us will agree. And so virtual reality creates this tremendous opportunity to connect with people, and not just to communicate and to share ideas, but to have shared experiences. You know, one of the ways that we bond together with other people is we go through experiences together. Silly things like bowling, or profound things like school and emotional experiences that we have together. Those are hard to do over video calling, but they can be done in virtual reality. And so we have our Oculus Quest 2 headset in the market right now. It's a standalone headset. It's the most accessible headset in history. You wrote the book on it, so I don't want to oversell it, but I think so far I stand by that claim. And of course, we just launched our Ray-Ban Stories product in partnership with Luxottica, which is about being out in the world and being able to capture memories and being able to talk to people while still having your ears, eyes, and hands free to be present in the world around you. And of course, all of this is working towards the direction of more complete augmented reality, where in addition to cameras and microphones and speakers, we potentially have displays integrated into our glasses that allow us to see digital artifacts in the world around us.
So we're sort of swirling around this idea of a metaverse without what feels like to me at this point a concise definition. So how are you defining the term? How are you and Facebook defining the term? And then I want to get into sort of how it's been used in the past and what those distinctions might be.
Yeah, the metaverse is it's both something that is with us in very small portions. This is actually pretty cool. You and I are far apart. We're having this conversation. If you swapped me out with an avatar, we'd still be having this conversation, and that's possible today with virtual reality and real reality. That's cool. But it's not very evenly distributed, as the future so often isn't, and it doesn't really feel like a cohesive thing. If you think about the apps that we use on our phones or the websites that we use, those are little digital worlds. We go there and we have our own little identity. They have their own physics, things that you can and cannot do. They have their own mores, things that you should and should not do. And they're just not very connected to each other. They're kind of independent. When I go to one world, I'm there. When I leave and change apps, I go completely to a different place. What if there was connectivity between these things? What if there was embodiment? What if we could take digital goods with us from place to place? What if we could take our representation of ourself with us from place to place? So for me, the metaverse is the stitching together of these currently separate digital spaces. And the watchword for me is continuity. That feeling that it's continuous, the feeling that I'm the same way that when I leave my house and I go to my workplace, those are very different physical places, but I'm still the continuous self that I am in the physical world. So for me, the metaverse is this idea, and part of the reason it's so vague is because it's so early. And that is a big shift for us as an industry, frankly, to be having this conversation as early as we are. That's informed by, I think, the last 10 years. We've seen that sometimes the public and regulators feel surprised by technological change. And that's not healthy for anybody. One of our first principles in Facebook Reality Labs, in fact, our first responsible innovation principle is never surprise people. So we're trying to have this conversation out in the open, well in advance of this technology being delivered in any integrated form.
The word metaverse obviously has been around for 20 years or more through science fiction. And in fact, it began bubbling up around consumer gaming experiences like Pokemon Go, Roblox, Fortnite. The writings of venture capitalist Matthew Ball got into the metaverse a lot a few years ago, yet Facebook pretty remarkably didn't start using it explicitly until this summer. With interviews that Mark Zuckerberg gave, with your own speaking about it, what was behind that shift for you speaking about it that way rather than a collection of experiences through Oculus or Portal or whatever that you had rolled out up to that point?
We'd certainly been using it internally as a concept, as a North Star for work, like our Horizon software, which is a virtual space that people can go and explore today through Oculus, but eventually more broadly. We had been using that internally. What triggered us to start using it externally and be more explicit about it was exactly what you said, actually. It has become a topic of conversation in the industry, and that's a topic that we wanted to participate in fully. So we're not trying to be coy about our ambitions here. We've certainly been talking, if you go back to Oculus Connect 3, 4, 5 years ago even, Mark is talking about these same ideas of virtual spaces that allow us to connect and have novel experiences. And it doesn't have to be in virtual reality, by the way. We access virtual spaces all the time through our phones and our computers. But these virtual spaces, so all the primitives were kind of in place. But the actual word that stitches it all together wasn't in the common mainstream lexicon until this year. And so we decided to start using it then.
And we also, in these other experiences that I mentioned, these are all kind of pocket metaverses, if you will. They give you some of the experiences of a metaverse, but they're all very self-contained. So in practicalities, kind of what phase of the game are we in as a whole, technological society as a whole with the metaverse, and what needs to be put in place for it to really succeed and break out of those pockets?
I think mostly what we have today are universes. and they can be very rich universes, but they are self-contained. They don't really connect to one another. And so, yeah, you've got a Roblox universe and a Pokemon Go universe, and you've got a Facebook universe and an Instagram universe, and there's not a tremendous amount that connects them. And I think that is exactly what we hope the metaverse will address. We hope there'll be greater continuity between these digital spaces, and greater connectivity in commerce, in services. If I have an avatar and I get clothes for that avatar, can I take those with me to different places? And so that is, in my opinion, what makes a metaverse, is when you have the connection between them. So we're at the very, very early stages. The places that I think we're doing the best as an industry are in communication. So messaging apps, whether it be WhatsApp or Discord or Snap, are stitching people together across the physical and the digital and across digital spaces. And I think that's very exciting. So communication right now is the first layer. I kind of think of that, if you'll forgive my nerd references, as like subspace communication from the Star Trek universe. Like, we've built the subspace communication relay, so I can be in one universe, you can be in another universe, and we can still communicate. That's cool. That's a start. But we've got to do much more. We've got to do teleportation. We've got to do transportation. We've got to be able to actually move me from where I am to where you are, and then have me not show up as a completely different person.
So that really hinges on sort of interoperability, right? Like, in order to get from place to place to place, and like you said, bring, whether it's your avatar, whether it's goods that you have purchased or made for that avatar, or for your personal surroundings, or for your work life, or anything else, that's feels like a big hurdle, especially when so many of the companies involved are kind of these walled gardens of sorts. So how do you put protocols into place to identify that at sort of all levels? Like, the stack that is needed, the sort of substrate for the metaverse to exist, is hugely broad. So how do you start to build openness into that as you're building it together?
Yeah, there's a tremendous amount of challenge here, as you note, from a standpoint of there's a trade-off when you're interoperable. The more interoperable something is, the less optimized it is. So it can make it hard for performance. It can make it hard to be as polished. It can be as hard to make the privacy, security, and integrity guarantees that people want to make, that the modern consumer expects. So there's real trade-offs. However, the difference, I think, with the metaverse is really about creators, and I mean creators really broadly, whether they be developers, whether they be people who sell even physical goods, people who will have storefronts, want to reach all the customers. They don't want to reach some small subset of the customers. And so there is a precedent here, which is the web. The web is a protocol-based system. The web has security, integrity, and privacy trade-offs associated with it. I think we know that now. But it's been a tremendous engine of commerce, a tremendous engine of information. And so there are going to be areas where the companies that exist today, and companies that are coming up now, and companies that haven't even been founded yet, are going to compete furiously to the great benefit of consumers in the local devices the consumer is using, in the storage, the cloud storage that they're using. There's also going to be areas where the incentive for the industry is for us to identify standards and practices that allow interoperability, because our consumers are not going to want to buy something in one universe and then have it be trapped there. And so there's a combination of competition and industry standards, which I think are all going to be the North Star here, is the consumer experience. None of this happens if we don't succeed in building a consumer experience that feels cohesive to the average person.
I hear you say that interoperability, the more interoperable something is, it comes at the expense of privacy, security. And I think, of course, the person who is heading up all this stuff at Facebook would say that. How do you frame that up in a way that sort of acknowledges and contextualizes the struggles that Facebook has had over the past few years in undoing its own mistakes and convincing people that they're on the up and up with regards to this?
Well, yeah, nobody's more informed about privacy and the challenges around it than Facebook is, after the conversations that we've been having with the public, with regulators over the last decade. But really, let's be honest, it's a bigger problem than Facebook. It's an industry-wide problem. And it goes much deeper than the last 10 years. It goes back 30 or 40 years. If you look at the challenges, the things that the EU has struggled with cookie banners. Cookies, are one of the founding protocols that power quite a bit of really good stuff on the internet, like being able to log into a website and not having to log in every single page load. And so there are really trade-offs that are implicit between these pieces. And one of the things that we are working on doing, having this conversation now, years in advance of it being material to the average consumer, is trying to, return the kind of conversation to the public in advance of the technology being built, so that there is already some dialogue happening before anything really changes for society. Face recognition is another kind of example like this, where, it's got tremendously powerful good uses. It's also got risks associated with it. I don't want unilaterally for Facebook or any device that I build to be trying to set standards on that. I'd like us to be a conversation that we have collectively as a society. So we have many, many examples here where we have to talk about, the functionality, integrity, privacy, security, trade space, and where we want to land on that as kind of a society.
So in talking about this, one of the things that supercharged the development of all these technologies over the past few years, not to put too fine a point on it, has been Facebook itself. Whether it was buying Oculus for between $2 and $3 billion almost a decade ago, creating Facebook Reality Labs, which has pumped more money and arguably accelerated the timeline of a lot of these technologies faster than they have been at any point in the past. There's a titanic first to market upside for you as a company. How does the metaverse? How do you build an open metaverse in a way that that sort of lets you leverage that without transforming it from the very beginning into some kind of oligopoly?
I'm not sure the history of technology bears out the assumptions that we so often have about it. I mean, if you go back, I really do think of AR and VR as being a pioneering set of technologies on the order of the work that was done in the 50s and 60s on computing itself, at Xerox PARC and at Stanford Research Institute. And if you look at Xerox, you don't have a Xerox phone in your pocket. In fact, the mainstream, the desktop PC popularized by IBM, I bet you don't have an IBM phone in your pocket. In fact, by the end of the desktop era, you didn't even have an IBM desktop necessarily. And so there is, I'm not saying, and likewise, the famously, the web came along and was something that disrupted Microsoft, and the phone came along and disrupted the web. The history of technology doesn't obviously favor the incumbent. It's easy to spend a huge amount of money and investment in technology and have the timing wrong, have done it wrong, have somebody fast follow and then identify the mistakes that you made and do it better. And if you go back and if you haven't seen the documentary on General Magic, which had the vision really for the iPhone in the mid 90s, and just struggled to execute against it. I think we all benefit as a society when money is going into research that has the very real material opportunity to improve our lives. I think we're all pretty happy that we have phones in our pockets. I don't think we're crying any tears over the loss of Xerox PARC or Xerox as a company doing what they were doing then. It's worth noting they did get paid there with the laser printer. That's also was invented there, so it completely paid for their entire investment. But yeah, so for me, I think the history of technology is certainly companies like ours and Apple and Google and Microsoft investing well ahead of returns. But it's not obvious that being there first necessarily means you're given the segment.
Those names that you ticked off are the ones you would expect, and they're also the ones that would signal that there are some regulatory conversations ahead to be had. What are some of the broader issues you anticipate needing to grapple with in public over the next 3, 5, 10 years?
Yeah, we've really been deeply engaged with regulators in conversation for a long time now, and I think certainly some of the conversations are ones that we're already having. Privacy from whom? Privacy from governments, privacy from corporations, What kind of control do people have? Safety and integrity. How do we give people control and enforce good behavior without violating privacy and norms there? Interoperability. These are all the stuff that we expect to be working on. The competition is fierce right now. There's a tremendous amount of investment. Obviously, people have been, Microsoft has been investing for a long time through their HoloLens program. We know Apple has a large investment. Certainly, Tim Cook has talked a lot about his enthusiasm for augmented reality. So the competition right now is fierce. But at some point, as it starts to hit consumers and become mainstream consumers, I think some of the things that we've talked about so far, and some novel things that none of us considered before because we couldn't foresee everything, will become topics of conversation for the public, for the press, and for regulators, and we'll have to address those as they come.
Well, I was saying at this sort of rebirth of virtual reality, and I'll say it again. I think that the folks who are in a position to do so have a real opportunity to build this in a way that anticipates the things that led us astray maybe with the first go round of the internet. So looking forward to seeing how you and all your colleagues in the industry do that. Looking forward to seeing you and others hold you accountable for that. And then I think there are a lot more conversations like this to be had in the future. Thanks for your time, Andrew. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
For our next session, brought to you by our Underwriter Facebook on the journey to the Metaverse, please welcome Nick Clegg, Vice President of Global Affairs and Communications.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks to The Atlantic for having us. Nick, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too. Yep.
So what an eventful week it has been for Facebook. Obviously, you had the Wall Street Journal's Facebook files come out. The company responded last night to its investigation into Instagram and its health with teens. I noticed yesterday that the company said that they would perhaps be providing the decks of the data discrepancy to Congress when Facebook goes to appear before a Senate committee on Thursday. Why wouldn't Facebook just release all of the decks, make them public so that we can sort of see for ourselves what this data says as opposed to taking your word for it? Yeah,
we'll do that. So in the next few days, we'll release it to Congress and then to public scrutiny, as you quite rightly say. The decks don't remotely. I mean, for those who still have an open mind, rather than what one reads from the headlines, if you were to read the decks and then compare it with some of the assertions that Instagram is toxic for all teens and so on, I don't think any reasonable person, once they've actually seen the decks or indeed read the post that Pratiti, our head of research, put out yesterday, I don't think any reasonable person would say that the research sustains that claim at all. But you're quite right. Of course, people should be the judge of that themselves. And so, yeah, we're just making sure that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted so that we can release it both to Congress and then to the public in the next few days.
In the next few days. Okay, interesting. And I kind of want to just get your take then, Nick, on the whole Wall Street Journal investigation writ large. I mean, you are addressing one piece of this by releasing the decks for the Instagram part, but they put out a multi-layered series. Are you going to be releasing more of the data that is affiliated with that investigation as time goes on, or is this going to be limited just to that Instagram piece?
I mean, for those people who've read the series, it's based on documents that have been picked out from, of course, the sea of documents and email exchanges and papers and discussion papers that, of course, swirl around a company the size of Facebook, and they've been deliberately provided and leaked by someone who clearly feels they have some points to make. It's just the nature of journalism and I'm not blaming the journalists. That's what happens when journalism is based on leaked material, which is leaked for a particular purpose and is leaked deliberately to try and cast what often obviously much wider and more complex and interconnected issues in a particular light. You just lose a lot of context. Are we going to spend all our time litigating each and every single one point? No, I don't think that's going to serve much value. But we did feel that, particularly for people who use our services and parents who have teenagers using Instagram, to read headlines saying that Instagram is toxic for your teenager is a particularly sort of pungent thing to say, and we just felt we're duty bound to try and provide people with a much more rounded picture. And by the way, it's not just what our own research shows. Crucially, it's what all external research shows, which is actually intuitively, I think, kind of makes sense, which is that for the vast majority of teenagers, for the vast majority of time, it's a really positive experience, a good experience. But for those teenagers, and gosh, I mean, I'm mid-50s, but we all remember what a turbulent time it is to be a teenager. For those dealing with issues which many teenagers, do at some point in their teens, whether it's sleeplessness or loneliness or depression or body image issues, for a minority of them, for some of the time, it's not a great experience. And I do think it's kind of right that Facebook asks itself those questions, because we can't solve the lives that teens have for themselves. And many of these things are things which would, arise anyway. But we do need to, of course, ask ourselves that if there are teens who, even if it's only a minority of them for only some of the time, who feel they're having a bad experience, and we need to work out what more we can do. And so, as Adam Mosseri, the head of Instagram, was saying today, we're looking at new tools, which I think will be helpful for teens going forward. So we're looking at something which would nudge a teen away from, if we see that, if our systems see that they're repeatedly looking at particular content which might be associated with negative sentiment, that we sort of nudge them to look at other sentiment, or even for them just to take a break, just to literally just take a break from Instagram, and make that much easier, so that they can just take a break, step right out of it for a while, and then sort of pick up from where they left off. These are exactly the kind of things which come on top of many, many changes, whether it's limits, whether it's hidden words, whether it's restrict, that we've done to deal with issues that are surfaced both by external and internal research. And I hope, look, notwithstanding the back and forth you get in these kind of press cycles, I hope when the sort of dust settles, people will see that we're just sincerely trying to kind of, like external researchers are, trying to work out what the complex relationship is between individuals, given their own individual circumstances in their lives and their use of social media.
It's interesting. It sounds like you're trying to be thoughtful about this, is what you're telling me. But I think the argument to a lot of people would be, look, Facebook rushed to build some of its products, and now we're dealing with the unintended consequences. Facebook and Instagram, put out this notice that they were going to create something for kids. And then this morning, Adam Mosseri said, okay, we're going to hit pause because we need more time. Now that you're heading into the metaverse, do you think that you are rushing into this, to sort of dodge some of these other real world problems that are happening? Or do you think this is something that is an extension of what you're building?
Well, before I come to the metaverse, can I just on the Instagram kids, let me be clear. We really do think Instagram kids is the right thing to do, because we all know, I've got kids myself, we all know that kids will use social media. They don't tell the truth about their age. It's difficult sometimes for parents to know exactly what their daughters and sons are up to. So doing what I think other companies have done, YouTube, TikTok, of developing a tool where you'd have tweens, so between 10 and 13, able to use Instagram, but without ads and with full parental controls, seems to us to be a safer experience than, in a sense, having all the kind of the kids playing cat and mouse with their parents at the moment. And by the way, one of the things we're going to, but the reason we're pausing is not because we think it's a bad idea, but because we understand that people have concerns, that many questions are raised. We want to take the time to take this to get it right, to talk to parents, to talk to experts, to talk to policy makers, and so on. And we hope what we can do is kind of demonstrate the value and the need for this product by doing so. But we're not doing so because we think it's a bad idea. We actually think it's a very good idea. And by the way, in the meantime, we'll continue to do some work which I think will be helpful, which is to provide on an opt-in basis, parents with, of course, with the cooperation of their teens, the ability to have greater oversight on what their teens are doing on Instagram. So you'd have a sort of parental supervision control, a new tool for teen users of Instagram. So look, I think this is all I think this is positive. I think this is us trying to be thoughtful. This is us sort of pausing in order to do the work in a thoughtful way going forward. Now, when you say, are we just rushing forward willy-nilly on the metaverse and not looking left, right, not pausing for thought, not kind of working out what the guardrail should be? I actually think what we're going to do with the metaverse couldn't be more different than that caricature. Because here's the thing, as Boz, I think, alluded to earlier, this technology is still in its very, very early stages. This technology, the AR and VR technology, is going to take at least 10, 15 years to come to maturity. So unlike the past, when, if you look at the eruption of social media a decade and a half ago, I work at Facebook for a company that's only, 15, 16 years old. As I often say, Mark Zuckerberg formed Facebook, I think the day after or the week after Roger Federer first became number one in world men's tennis. So the Federer era is longer than the Facebook era. This has all erupted globally in a very short period of time. I think the metaverse is going to be very different. This is going to be a much, much more gradual and deliberate, and therefore I hope kind of almost sort of more thoughtful process of building technology whilst also asking the wider ethical, regulatory, legal, and societal questions. How can I put it? It's very different. It's almost the opposite to that now long abandoned slogan of move fast and break things. What we want to do, by contrast with the metaverse, is move forward methodically over time and collaboratively with other folk in the industry, with researchers, with policymakers, and so on. And I think that's why we can do this, if you like, just because of the nature of the technology, because of the nature of the ambition of that technology. We can do this quite different to the way that you described in the past, and certainly not at some breathless, breakneck, or irresponsible pace.
But Facebook's business has always been reliant on really steady, but extreme growth. And so if you're getting into the metaverse while other competitive companies are also trying to break through, doesn't that create some sort of competitive disadvantage if you're going to be as slow as you claim to be going?
Well, look, it is definitely a new departure for us. That is undoubtedly true. This is quite a different direction. It's different. It's an extrapolation of what Facebook has always done, because it's all about enriching human connection. It's all about, as Boz said, it's sort of in a sense moving from a sort of 2D to a 3D internet. It's embedding that sense of presence and also really embedding that sense of continuity as people inhabit or spend time on the metaverse in the future. But of course, it's different in the sense that we're going to be providing the hardware that accompanies the metaverse for many folk who want to enjoy it in its full richness. But crucially, the pace of all of this is not really set by a sort of business strategy. It's just that the technology will require years and years of multi-billion-dollar investment going forward before they really reach their full potential. We will look back in years to come and look at the Stella glasses, which we launched in cooperation with Luxottica, the Ray-Ban Stella glasses, just a few weeks ago, as they're great fun to use, but we will look back on them as extraordinarily sort of primitive tools. But it'll take some time before we look back on this technology in that light, and that's why we have the opportunity now to ask ourselves these wider questions. Because look, here's the thing, Sarah. Facebook is neither going to build, own, or run the metaverse on its own. I mean, in fact, if Facebook did not exist, the metaverse, investment in AR and VR technologies, is going to progress anyway. And I think the big question is, how can we collaborate across the industry to make sure that when users use the metaverse, they don't get, if I can put it, they don't get sort of stuck in the Apple metaverse, the Epic metaverse, the Facebook metaverse, the Google metaverse. We're going to have to work together to try and create standards of interoperability so that people can move from one part of the metaverse to the next. Because what we don't want is a sort of corporately balkanized and fragmented metaverse. And that requires standards, norms, interoperability, all sorts of technical specifications to allow people to travel from one part of the metaverse to the next. So if you, for instance, have your avatar and you buy some clothing for that avatar, in one part of the metaverse. You want to be able to move with that clothing from one part of the metaverse to the next. That is going to take some doing. It's going to take some time. And here's the thing. It's going to take a level of cooperation between what are, in other respects, ferociously competitive players in the tech space, which I hope we will be able to develop in the months and years to come.
What you're describing to me, Nick, sounds a lot like what Facebook did for content with an independent oversight board. It sounds a lot to me what your colleague David Marcus recently described to me with the DM Association, right? A third party that Facebook is a part of, but works with partners to help establish norms. Are you thinking about or in talks to create a third party sort of governing body that would sort of oversee everything that's happening as the metaverse builds out?
We're certainly having discussions which haven't come to fruition yet. So I'm just not in a position to say much more about them. And they're not, crucially, they're not in my gift or that of Facebook, to see whether there is a way in which the industry players that are all making significant investments in this space could find some forum, some safe and sensible space where they can, compare notes and work on some of these common standards together. Because as I described earlier, if you don't do that at the outset, and that can be either through voluntary cooperation amongst industry players, or it can over time, of course, also be framed through some kind of regulatory entity or impulse as well. But if you don't do that, and I do feel strongly about it, if you don't do this at the outset and start getting the ball rolling so that we can have those discussions across the different slices of the metaverse cake that we're all working on, then in the end, the people who will lose out will be users, because it just won't become the sum of its parts. And that's what we want to try and create here. No one can do it on their own. No one should aspire to do it on their own. I think it's a good thing that no one can do it on their own. No one wants to live in a metaverse owned and governed by one entity alone. In short, Sarah, I think I don't quite know what it kind of looks like right at this stage. But the point of your question, which is that in an ideal world, you would have a forum where those discussions can take place. I think that's absolutely right. And that's one of the many sort of exciting non-technical, non-engineering things that need to happen to accompany this journey on the metaverse, so that we innovate institutionally and regulatorily, just as we innovate technically in an engineering sense.
One of the things I noticed when you built Facebook 1.0 on desktop, and then when Facebook 2.0 came out on mobile, was that we're now just starting to understand how those different technologies, when not regulated at a certain pace adequately, created a lot of inequality around the world. How are you thinking about whether or not the metaverse would create inequality as you're trying to build this out and you're starting to dedicate more resources to research, policy, et cetera?
Well, I think the first thing to say is, since you mentioned it, we need to do more research, and we need to do that research now and not just sort of play catch up later. And that's why I can announce, here that now that we're launching a 2-year, $50 million investment fund for external researchers and programs around the world, and that's a really important point. We're not sort of doing this just with a small clique of researchers on the West Coast. We're very keen to make sure that this fund elicits and supports research around the world. We're working, for instance, with the Organization of American States on skills development for students, creators, and small businesses, business owners in Latin America who want to explore the metaverse. Across Africa, we're supporting 3 organizations called Africa No Filter, Electric South, and Emisi 3D, to amplify African voices using immersive technology. We're working with women in immersive tech, supporting women and underrepresented groups who are driving Europe's virtual, augmented and mixed reality sectors. And of course, with universities, we're working with, for instance, Seoul University and the University of Hong Kong, who are doing some research into safety, ethics, and responsible design. We're supporting the National University of Singapore on privacy and data use. So, I hope this program, it's a start, 50 million over 2 years. I've elaborated on some of the partners that we have identified already, and I hope we'll be able to announce more partners and more programs soon. I hope that will provide an ecosystem of thoughtful research, spreading across integrity, safety, privacy, data use, all of which we need, to which we don't have perfect answers yet. We're not pretending we have perfect answers yet, but we do need to make sure that we provide the support we can to researchers so that we can collaboratively come up with those answers. And as you say, I hope that would be of some use, that external research, to regulators who inevitably over time will be asking themselves the same questions. As they read and hear more about the metaverse, regulators are quite understandably going to start thinking, oh, what's our role here? What's the role for regulation? And I hope some of this research will furnish them with some of the data and prompt some of the answers which they need to arrive at themselves.
Nick, we have just about run out of time, but one very quick question for you, which is, you're talking about investing up front in all this research and all these policy considerations in the metaverse, as opposed to just moving fast and break things. So in reality, when is the average person going to actually feel and get to experience the metaverse? Is it a 5 years from now thing, a 20 years from now thing? When does it actually happen?
Well, you can experience it now, and actually you can experience it on your phone or your desktop. You can use, you can have access to Horizons. You can buy, if you can, Oculus 2, wonderful headset. I do my weekly team meetings on a Monday in the metaverse. We'll have avatars. We sit around a table. We have a whiteboard. We have this amazing sort of blended thing where you can actually look at your desktop, even though you're in the metaverse. So it is here and now, but we need to make sure that the hardware is affordable, that people have access to it. We want as many people to have access to this as possible. And of course, the ease of use, the sense of presence is eventually going to evolve from being an avatar of yourself to actually being a hologram of yourself. So I think it's only until we get to that stage that you and I in future, Sarah, will be able to have this conversation. And I'm not looking at you through a camera or a flat screen, but we kind of literally feel we are sitting, not just an avatar of ourselves, but we are sitting, in the same kind of room together, even though we're physically not in that room ourselves. I think that is going to take some time, but the current manifestations of the metaverse, they're there. They're here now. They're here now. Everyone can, join the journey, and I hope many people do.
Nick Clegg, thank you so much for your time today. And thank you again to The Atlantic for hosting this great conversation.
Thank you. Thanks very much.